Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Dickens Olewe. I'm a journalist. I currently work for the BBC in London. I'm also a former JSK Journalism Fellow at Stanford University. So now, before I introduce the panel for what I believe will be a fascinating conversation about the media in East Africa, of course, including more details about how to apply for the Aga Khan University's Innovators Residence Program. I wanted to share something, that I've been thinking about all week, and don't worry, it's definitely related to our discussion today. So on Monday morning, I read a blog by South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa. He said he had met the South African National Editors Forum. He had met the editors last week, South African editors last week. And from what he wrote, it's obvious that the editors told the president that the media is in crisis and they needed every help, including enrolling him as the leader of the country to make a case for them to the public. So I just wanted to kind of just read a couple of paragraphs that stood out for me. And I quote here: "A free press is not an end in itself. It is a means by which democracy is secured and upheld. During this pandemic, our media has played not just its traditional watchdog role, but exercised its civic duty in supporting the national effort to contain the coronavirus. Some publications lost as much as 60% of their income in the early days of the lockdown. A number of companies have had to implement salary cuts, reduce staff numbers, or reduce hours worked. Regrettably, some publications have been forced to close, among them some of South Africa's most established and well-known magazine titles. As a society, we owe the media our full support, whether it is electing to pay for content, supporting crowd-funded journalism, paying our SABC license fees, or simply buying a newspaper. We can all play our part to support this industry in crisis. As government, despite the gloomy economic climate, we will continue to extend advertising spend to publications and broadcasters, especially community media. The job losses that have resulted from the lockdown have exacerbated a crisis for the media companies already facing challenges like loss of advertising revenues, falling circulation, and market share being taken by mobile-first news and other technologies. These financial difficulties are being faced across board, from online titles to traditional broadsheets to the public broadcaster. The private sector must also continue to support the industry through advertising and working with the media in the production of innovative content in line with global media trends. He also encouraged local philanthropic and donor organizations to come on board to support public interest ventures, or rather public interest journalism ventures, as is the case in many democracies. So I personally found that just incredible, because rarely do you find an African leader making such a passionate case for the media. Its right to exist, to report independently, and its crucial role in a democracy. So the media in East Africa is facing similar challenges that the president highlighted. And we have a great panel to explore that. So Fausta Musokwa is the interim executive director at Tanzania Media Foundation. Abbas Mpindi is the CEO and founder Media Challenge Initiative in Uganda. And Njoki Chege is Director Innovation Center at the Aga Khan University in Kenya. So just remember that if you obviously have a question, there's a chat box feature, drop something there. I'll definitely try and bring that on into our conversation. So Fausta, I want to start with you. So Tanzania has been kind of like been the outlier in the region, because unlike Kenya and Uganda, it has not imposed a lockdown or even a curfew to curb the spread of coronavirus. And the economy has pretty much been open. So what has it been like for the media in Tanzania?
So hi, Dickens, and hi, everyone listening. even if we did not actually impose a lockdown, it's been hard. As the Tanzania Media Foundation, we have been closely tracking some of our media partners and talking with other media organizations regarding what the media has gone through during the I guess the high season of COVID with respect to Tanzania, which kind of started mid-March. And there were, as has happened in South Africa, from the statement, there were media houses that could not operate. There were media houses that had to let go of a lot of staff. And there were journalists who were feeling very unsafe continuing to cover stories during that period. And so it's quite remarkable that in spite of all this, I think partly because the media sector has been struggling with a lot of these things. And so there's a kind of inbuilt resilience in the sector and an ability to absorb a high level of shocks. We've still had a lot of good coverage. But that is not to say that it hasn't been a very tough time for media. It certainly has. I know Nation Media Group owns Mwananchi Communications to a large percent, and a lot of, and that's kind of the biggest in the print media sector, particularly in Tanzania. And they let go of a lot of staff during this period. And others as well, particularly small, medium-sized media outlets have suffered a lot. So it's been tough.
So has that been because of a slowdown in Tanzania, or just kind of like the effect, kind of like the regional effect of the pandemic, say, for example, in Kenya and Uganda?
I think we would need to, I mean, looking at only the pandemic period would be misleading. The pandemic period heightened what was happening before. Already, we already had contexts of advertisers cutting down and opting for using spaces that are cheaper, online spaces. And so legacy media is suffering. And online, our media sector is struggling to monetize online opportunities. So it's not just about the pandemic period. It's not just about advertising during this period. And definitely in the very first 1 to couple of months, a lot of businesses said, look, we can't, we're going to hold and see what happens. So even if we didn't lock down, those first 2 months were particularly tough. Yeah, for the sector. For the little bit of advertising that was already going to the sector. And there's, you know, even if the sector has been trying to diversify and tap into other sources of revenue, still advertising is the biggest source. We definitely don't have a subscription-based media sector or media outlets that really rely on subscription. It's advertising. And again, it's either corporate or government, public. Yeah, with public, the challenge, of course, is the regulatory framework has been changing as well. So it's kind of a double impact. So on the one side, COVID, wham, and on the other side, what was happening from the get-go, from beginning, from years back.
Great. So Abbas, I'm curious about what sort of media is emerging out of the pandemic, because Uganda had, you kind of like a, very strong, there was a curfew and then some sort of like a mini lockdown, if you can call it that. So what kind of media is emerging out of the lockdown?
Thanks, Dickens. And I think, first of all, the comments you made from President Ramaphosa, I think that's very powerful to see, President come out, because we really see that the media is struggling. In Uganda, I don't see a huge difference in terms of what kind of media we have now compared to before COVID. And I say that because a lot of things, especially in terms of content, we've seen at least a move towards a lot of focus on COVID stories that you will from like literally morning to evening, just reading or consuming COVID stories. But I've also seen a lot of innovativeness come from there in terms of how people are trying to, how journalists are trying to tell stories, and how they're trying to intersect the stories from COVID to other issues, from gender to business, and how the pandemic in itself is affecting all those other spaces, so that we don't just get, you know, one angle of a story. We've seen challenges like, you know, some newspapers closing, especially the local newspapers that were, you know, serving local languages. Those, when they close, it means even journalists are losing their jobs. What we've also seen is journalists who were laid off from a local newspaper starting their own newspaper in the same language, which is something that, you know, one company closes that, you know, that newspaper, and then the same journalists who are have been challenged open up a newspaper, and apparently they sold a lot of copies on their first day when they debuted on the streets, which shows, you know, hope for the industry. I've also seen a lot of media houses trying to invest in journalists. It leaves a lot to be desired, especially in terms of safety, when they are reporting in line of duty, reporting about COVID-19. Do they have, you know, protective gears? Have they been trained on how to distance report from when they're doing interviews? And you see there are some media houses that are following the SOPs and the guidelines, but the others still a long way to go. So for me, that would be my analysis of what, and I would add again, to go back to what President Ramaphosa shared in terms of really finding the different ways to support the industry, whether through innovation or through advertisement continuously to the different media stations, especially community media that are not near or close to the advertisement space in the capitals. Those are very crucial, because that's where a lot of our people who live in the rural areas are getting their information. So that support is needed urgently. Thank you.
I think one thing that you've just, when you're talking about the journalists who had lost their jobs and suddenly a couple of them have started their own publications, it kind of just reminded me about this word we talk about a lot, innovation.
Yes.
Because in this case, in our own definition, especially like when, you know, when those of us in this field talk about innovation, we are essentially talking about digital platforms. But here is a journalist, print journalist, laid off, but then starting a print publication. I wonder whether you can just reflect on what's your understanding of this word innovation in journalism.
For me, innovation in journalism is not about, you know, digital platforms. It's bringing a combination of experiences and knowledges to, you know, add on to something that is, I would say, struggling, or to start something new but using existing knowledge. It doesn't have to be only on digital. For example, if you're talking about, you can talk about revenue models, those could be digital, but they could also be traditional methods that can be used through the community, funding, you know, a program on a radio. We have a case like in Uganda with, I think it's Speak or Mega FM in Northern Uganda, and they have a very good community radio program that is supported by different funders. So for me, it really cuts across in terms of from where you would say, what are the challenges facing the media? What are the changes we are having right now in the media landscape? The consumption habits of readers, of people who are watching, you know, TV have totally changed. So does it take a digital tool or innovation to tap into the new habits, consumption habits of people? Maybe not. When we talk about the credibility of journalists and media houses before even COVID hit, the media fraternity was struggling with, credibility and trust issues. So the question is, what innovative ideas can we bring up to make sure that we redeem that, the trust, to make sure that right now, we need information, we need journalists more than ever to be at the top of their game. How can we make sure that, journalists don't get fired at this timing point? How do we make sure that challenges like fake news, how do we make sure that even we devise community methods of fact checking that may not entirely be on the internet or using digital tools and digital verification tools? So it cuts across, and it shouldn't be restricted to only, digital innovations.
Great. And Njoki, I want to bring you in here because Abbas has mentioned public interest journalism, which Ramaphosa as well mentioned in his statement. And somebody a few weeks ago asked me whether there is a market for what we refer to as public interest journalism. I'm still thinking of a clever answer, but I guess you have one. So is there a market for public interest journalism?
Thank you, Dickens, and fellow colleagues for putting this together. First of all, I'd like to react to President Ramaphosa's appeal to support the media. Like you said, it's a very unique occurrence that an African president would actually call out to the public to support the media. Usually, what happens with African presidents is that they clamp down on media and claw back on issues of press freedom, gains that we have made over the decades. So I think it's incredible, and it's a worthy appeal. To your question on public interest journalism, the mess that we are in right now, Dickens and my fellow panelists and people who have attended, the mess that we are in right now, what we are seeing right now, the decline of the media industry is a signal of a deeper underlying issue. And that issue is a systemic lack of investing in public journalism. So what is happening right now is that local media organizations, or what you call legacy media, have over-commercialized news. So they have gone into cheap, easy to produce news with the aim of maximizing profit. And that is why we are in this problem today, because the information that they're giving us, the kind of news that they're giving us, very easily put together, kind of news rushed and all that, is available just about anywhere on the internet. Now that, coupled with the misinformation that is so rife in social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and every other place, now gives us a perfect recipe for disaster. And this is why we need to go back to the basics and begin to invest in public interest journalism. Because what we have been seeing until today has just been shareholder interest journalism. Now, most of these media organizations that we are calling legacy media organizations are actually publicly traded companies that have been legally bound to maximize shareholder profits, yeah? And anything will go as long as it brings in the money, it brings in cheap advertising and all that. So this is why I think that there is a really huge market for public interest journalism, and that is none other than the public. Because studies have shown in many countries in the West, particularly in the US, that communities that have been deprived of good quality journalism are unable to elect people who can speak for them, number one. And number two, they are completely ignorant of the issues that are affecting their societies. For me, the reason why I think there's a huge market for public interest journalism is because I think of journalism as a public good. I think of journalism in the same way I'll think of the rail system, the road system, water, electricity, and all that, because this is an essential good for the public. But when we are over commercializing journalism and basing the success of local media organizations, hinging the success on subscriptions, where we are asking people to pay for news, to pay to access good, high quality journalism, then that ensures that there is a desert. And there's a group of people in our society that are unable to access high quality journalism. So
that's really fascinating.
yes.
What you're saying there, that distinction about these media organizations are pretty much, their businesses, obviously, working towards a profit for shareholders, are not necessarily serving the public. I'm just wondering, I mean, this crisis, the pandemic is definitely, has definitely upended business as usual. And I know you, because of your position, you talk to media executives in Kenya. Do you feel like there's some sort of, is this like sort of like an inflection point that they know they're feeling like, business as usual is definitely not going to work this time around, especially post the pandemic?
Yes, absolutely. This is a tipping point for East African media, not just Kenyan media. And if I may say, it's also a tipping point for global media. Like Foster said, this pandemic has simply, revealed the underlying problems of the media. And we are seeing a new era of digital journalism where these legacy media organizations are now stopping to, they have moved from just paying lip service to digital media to actually practicing these digital strategies that they keep talking about. So this is a critical reawakening point for Kenyan media. I'll speak for Kenyan media. But also, I think it has also brought them to the realization that audiences are very particular about the kind of journalism that they're going to buy. And they've realized that the only way to save Kenyan journalism is through bringing high quality journalism to our pages. So of course, we are seeing them tinkering with strategies like subscriptions and video, and now they're getting into audio and podcasting and all that stuff. But I think the most critical issue here that they have realized is that the pandemic has accelerated the pivot to digital. What I can tell you for sure, the strategies that we are seeing being launched by some legacy news media organizations today are actually strategies that would have been launched in 2022. But because of this pandemic, because of the lockdowns that undermined the distribution networks of newspapers, and because of the falling revenues, I mean, for one of these media organizations, the revenues fell by 60% 2 days after the first case of coronavirus was announced in Kenya. I mean, the next day was just phone calls after phone calls from advertising agencies and marketing people from different advertisers, just canceling contracts left, right, and center. Because as we know, during a crisis, when companies have to face a crisis, usually the first budget to suffer, to be cut, is the marketing and advertising budget. And that's why the media is in the problems that they're in today.
Briefly, Njoki, I know in Kenya, the government, when it was, implementing, or rather announcing the strict measures that were going to be implemented to curb the spread of coronavirus, the media was listed among what the government said was as an essential service.
Yes.
Do you think that, I don't know whether it's a missed opportunity, but was there an opportunity for the media to kind of find a way in which you can, because you're saying you're making the case for journalism being a public good, but was there an opportunity? Is there still an opportunity for the media to kind of make the case for some sort of concessions from the government that can help them with some of these revenue problems they're facing?
Yeah, so that conversation has taken place in Kenya, where the Kenya Editors Guild has signaled the government to support the media development fund, where they're trying to convince the government to put aside some funding for media and all that. But the big question here is, even as Cyril Ramaphosa talks about supporting the media, it's a whole different ballgame in Kenya. The big question here is going to be, is the government going to use this media investment fund as a tool to control the freedom of the press and to control the narratives that are going to be published in the media? So this could just be another tool or a case of the media coming from the frying pan into the fire. So that's
No,
so that's usually my biggest. So that's not just me. It's not personal. I mean, there's some consensus around this. Even when you talk about institutionalizing license fees and all that kind of thing, like what the BBC funding model. I mean, we are seeing what is happening at BBC in the UK. The BBC is cutting down on people and all that, on staff. So I think for me, the media that we want is a heavy investment in public interest journalism. And number two, the issue of media viability, that is sustainable journalism. And that's it's going to be a very long and difficult journey, but that is the only way to ensure a free press and an informed society.
Okay, great. Fausto, I want to bring you in here, especially on I think it's just that element of government involvement, because it's not been easy for the Tanzanian media, just because the government has been, has kind of like come up with some rules and regulations which do not make it easy for independent and accountable journalism to be done in Tanzania. Could you just let us in what actually is happening in Tanzania, especially as it comes to how the media is operating, considering the environment?
So we do have a very interesting media environment in Tanzania right now, and we've probably been in the spotlight for a lot of new laws and new regulations that change the way the media operates, or force the media to change the way it operates. And this has been very, very challenging. I must say, with the media sector already struggling with all the issues that Abbas and Joki raised with respect to the Ugandan and the Kenyan context, is not very different here. in the sense that um, you have a context where, at least as civil society actors, we see an opportunity and a need for more public interest journalism. But then how do you get public interest journalism if on the one hand, and I mean high quality public interest journalism, if on the one hand the media is financially constrained and so is not able to mobilize the kind of resources that will enable them to hire high quality journalism graduates and retain them within the media sector. And then also if other than the fact that it cannot mobilize the resources to do this, it also has to constantly face a changing regulatory framework. And so constantly have to get to know or get familiar with new laws and regulations, which is kind of what has been happening in Tanzania for the past couple of years. So the environment is definitely constraining. And a few weeks ago, we were, I mean, Tanzania Media Foundation, we were at a session with editors to discuss opportunities for public interest journalism through the Tanzania Editors Forum. And as civil society actors, we have our vision and what we feel is possible. But with editors, journalists, they are practically in the space of trying to realize public interest journalism in practice. And at least for that discussion, which we had in August, it came out to us, and it's not new, definitely, it came out to us that editors are crying out for a bigger investment in understanding the sector. So for me, at least, when we talk about innovation, I think this is one area that we need to look at, because we have it's not just in Tanzania, it's globally, this clampdown on press freedom in one way or another, either through laws that speak to the challenges that the media sector is already going through: misinformation, disinformation, limited levels of professionalism. These are real concerns, and so the laws will speak to that, but they're also vehicles for directing the media to operate in a way that that is either not threatening to those who can impose those laws. So this need for investing in a very deep understanding of those changes and what those changes need in terms of responses. For me, at least, this is also something that innovation can speak to, because I think we and this is to go back to kind of something that Abbas said, of innovation as only about digital spaces and digital opportunities, but innovation about creating new ways to serve the public, at least media sector innovation, creating new ways to serve the public, public's need for access to information. And in order for you to do that, at least for the media sector in Tanzania, the cry is to better understand the new dynamics that have been created by the laws, by the constraints, the economic constraints, and also the technological changes which create new opportunities. So this mix and match of things, for me at least, I think that if we manage them well, even with the constraints that we are seeing in terms of the changes in the regulatory framework, there is still an opportunity for some public interest that speaks to the needs of the public.
And, you know, I kind of want to bring another story that I read about this week, which was quite outstanding. Millard Dayo, who has become, according to his tweet, I've not verified this, but according to his tweet, he is the first African publisher to hit 1 billion views on YouTube.
Yes.
So could you just, for those who don't know him, obviously, just tell us who he is and how is he, especially because I know he has got into problems with the authorities in the past, but how is he operating? What is he doing right to have those kind of like outstanding numbers?
So Millard Ayo has a very interesting business model in the sense that he started out as a presenter on one of the most popular radio stations in Tanzania amongst the youth. This is Clouds. And he continues to have that while he set up IOTV and millardayo.com and moved into the digital space. And I think that what Millard did well and what other actors in the space can learn from is to capitalize on your niche. I think what Millard is doing is he's found in youth, but also in people who need to know what is happening on the ground quickly. Audience that is committed and loyal. I would say that Millard Ayo's journalism is not an investigative, deep kind of journalism. It's focused on delivering news to you very quickly and helping you to know what is going on very quickly, which is very, very useful in itself. But certainly it's not everything that the media sector needs, but definitely his model speaks to finding a niche. And I think that also is something that the sector in its struggles can learn from. And we do have a couple of other media organizations and media platforms in Tanzania that have done that, and that because of that are doing better regardless of the environment. I mean, the change in the environment is affecting everyone. And I think where media initially could sit comfortably and expect the money to come in, now they have to go looking for that money. But this, to me, is reasonable, particularly given what we want media to do for society. We want media to provide relevant, reliable information for a public that is trying to navigate its daily life or daily lives or their daily lives. And for media to do this, I think they also have to be in the thick of things, in navigating those spaces in one way or another, and not simply sitting back, which in one way, I think for the media sector in Tanzania, when it crossed from being closed in the 90s, early 90s, to liberalization, I think that there was in some ways, an opportunity to make easy money. That has changed now. And I think to nurture young journalists to be aware of the different demands for the context now, this is where I think I'm going back to what I said with respect to the need for data, the need for regular research and analysis of changes, and the need to be on top of reacting to those changes, which is what Millard is doing well.
Great. And Abbas, I want to bring you in on something Fausta said, which I know is kind of relatable in Uganda, just on this issue about operating in a restrictive environment. I wonder whether you could just tell me what you think, like innovating in this space, in terms of how do you, for example, operate in a restrictive environment? How can you still do public accounting-seeking journalism in a restrictive environment? Is there like an innovative way of doing journalism in that environment, or do you just capitulate and just do what the authorities say?
I think it's very unfortunate to for these restrictive laws to be in place at a time when you need access to information. So if there is anything COVID-19 has shown us, and I've shared this before with other people, that if we didn't have journalism on news platforms, more people would die. And it's basically because the media has played, and which I think also President Ramaphosa highlights, that the media has played an important role in terms of educating creating awareness, fact-checking, debunking myths, and all that you can't achieve unless you have a free press. So if you want the press to give you that quality journalism, quality information to save the public, then you have to also, if you're a government, you have also to think about how you are going to have enabling policies for that kind of press to operate. So in terms of innovations, then one thing for sure is for innovators to know is that you have to do, you have to do and you have to work with the government, existing policies, existing laws. But you have to find a way of, kickstarting conversations on how can we create policies and laws that are not just for now, but are going to ensure that even generations coming after us are not going to be affected by those. So forward thinking. So, and gets back to the other conversation on innovation. Is it just about, digital and internet platforms? No, it's even the way of thinking about how we planning sustainability in terms of legal regimes. If we introduce, restrictive measures today, how, what will happen to children or our young journalists in the next 20, 30 years? What are they inheriting from those platforms? So one of the things that I really want to see happen, and again, it's because the industry is also very disunited, the journalism and media industry, we need to have like one voice to be able to bring the different sectors on regulatory sectors on one table to have these conversations. One thing that I really, really think that could be innovative around how to create, an environment that brings all the stakeholders together to create win-win situations that we are able to support a free press in not just in our countries, but on the continent, because we know that without a free press, a lot of all these things that we talk about, democracy, health of the people, is in shambles, is in one way or the other affected. We're talking about education, and we know now that our education systems are challenged. They are theoretical. They are highly following a colonialist curriculum, and journalism in one way or another should play a key role in highlighting those challenges. And for us, and I've seen this when, all these policymakers want to pass policies and laws, they have a way of wanting to work with the media. They want you to advocate, to do all these, publish all these articles about the need for those policies that they're pushing for. But when it comes to actually creating policies that support media, we don't see them. And that's where, for me, I think we need to get to a drawing board to innovate together with all stakeholders, regulators across the region, to see how can we really operate and ensure that there is a free press and journalism is because also the thing about when we talk about free press, we look at the laws, but we don't look at like the welfare of journalists themselves, because we could have the policies and the laws and they're okay, but if journalists continue to be paid peanuts if we can't innovate to make sure that the journalists are paid well, to not be bribed, to avoid brown envelopes like here in Uganda, then the free press is also just something that we're throwing around. So for me, it's that's what I think, Dickens.
Somebody is there's a question here from Facebook. Let me just read it. Might you know, from all the downsizing that has happened in the media, what the ratio of women to men is? I don't know who wants to take that. If you know, is there a study that you are aware of about kind of the ratio of women to men who have lost their jobs, in the region?
Not any study that I'm aware about right now. I think there's been a lot of focus on trying to find ways for those journalists to survive through different means, and less effort right now is invested in researching, like the ratio of people who have been laid off. But I think for since we are talking innovation, I think that could be one of those areas where people
Yeah, yeah,
invest to see, especially media organizations that are working, on gender and media, uh, and equity issues.
yeah. But I think just to
Can I
chip,
speak?
yeah, yeah,
Can I
definitely.
speak?
Go ahead.
Um, and I want to go back to what I said, and why, for me at least, I feel like we really need to also invest in understanding the sector, because it's exactly the same here as Abbas has intimated it is in Uganda, that we are aware of uh, um, how gendered workspaces are, and journalism is no different. But the investment in understanding the dynamics and how men and women are being affected by what is going on in the sector, um, I think has not been significant. And one of the areas that TMF works on is to promote diversity, media sector diversity, and we're particularly interested in increasing the prominence of women's participation in news production as gatekeepers, so at the editorial level, but also as media owners, and also as journalists given the opportunity to occupy different beats, and not these so-called traditionally women beats, if at all there is that kind of thing. So I think at least we should be, and I hope that in this Innovators in Residence program, first of all, I hope that we will see a lot of young women, older women, and just women in general expressing an interest in this opportunity and using it to help us to understand. If we just use the population dynamics, women constitute a significant section of the population, and so they're a significant section of the audience. So they need to be, or we need to be, we need to be given the room to also be newsmakers, news producers, and gatekeepers, or we need to create that room if we're not being given it. And I think that this can speak to that. But definitely there is a challenge with respect to data and with respect to research that really understands or helps us to understand these dynamics.
That's
this
great.
is also one area that hopes to work in. And yeah, I hope that others as well would take a keen interest in that area.
Yeah. Njoki, Fausta has mentioned the Innovators Residence Program. What is it? And for those listening and interested, how can they apply?
Thank you. And I can also see there's a question here from an anonymous attendee who's talking about what are the opportunities for the journalists who have lost jobs in the past 2 years. So I'll answer that as I talk about our Innovators in Residence program. So it is a program in which we are supporting new media ideas and existing media startups through grant funding of $20,000, coaching, mentorship, and training. It is a one-year program that is open to media innovators across East Africa, that is Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. This is the second cohort that we are supporting. Our first cohort, which was onboarded in November of 2019, is about to finish their residency. And one of the teams that we are supporting is called Debunk Media, that is led by former journalist with Citizen TV, Asha Mwilu. So this program essentially pairs up teams of innovators in residence with coaches who are going to hold them accountable to their milestones. They also, support our innovators through training and also mentorship as well. So that is our Innovators in Residence program. We have recently launched a call for applications. It's online. If you want to apply, just go to www.aku.edu/GSMC, and you will see uh, um, a pop-up poster with all the details and all that. So it's a pretty simple form to fill. But what is important to note is that we do not accept individual applications. We accept applications only from teams of innovators in residence. That is people who come together to create a good media idea, multi-skilled team, and all that. So those are some of the opportunities. Besides Aga Khan, I'm sure there are also other NGOs that are currently funding journalists to do storytelling. For those people who are asking about what are the opportunities for people who have lost their jobs in the past 2 years. Thank you, Dickens.
Okay, and we have just a few minutes, and I just wanted to quickly reflect on two things that I'm thinking about. One is when the three of you were talking about just how innovating around working working in environments or countries that are restrictive. I was wondering whether there could be networks, like you're talking about. You're saying, how can we work together? Is there a way in which the three journalists in the three African countries could work? You publish my work because I can't publish it in my country, for example. I think that would be a really interesting one. The other thing as well that I wondered whether you could also briefly comment about is just going back to Millard Dio, who interestingly he, I think, probably making a lot of money on YouTube. But it's quite interesting how you can probably look at journalists who probably create their own ventures, and then obviously try and get as many as many people watching their content in these platforms, and therefore the monetization of what they're doing is essentially on the platforms and not necessarily directly from the public, which it's also a really interesting model. I wondered whether you could any of you could just briefly comment on those two things. Abbas, you seem keen.
Yeah. On the first issue, the idea of collaborative journalism across the continent is very crucial, and more than ever now. I think I have had cases where journalists want to investigate something locally, but they know their media house can't publish it. They've reached out to a sister media house or another journalist who in another country who could easily publish that article piece, because I think if there's anything we need our journalists alive than risking sometimes to do all these stories and then they're killed. So I'm a big fan of collaborative journalism, and I think that's one of the biggest. We don't have like a CNN of Africa or of East Africa that you say or a BBC of the sort that is really strong on the ground. So the only way we can start building those networks is to through programs like Innovators in Residence. I'm glad this is going East Africa. So if these individuals across the region are able to collaborate on stories that may not be even investigative in nature, but even like solutions journalism, to share stories across the region that something innovative is being done in Tanzania that a young Ugandan or a young Kenyan could see and replicate. That kind of journalism requires collaboration, and I think it's the way to go. and networks like these ones that we are building should help us to achieve that.
Interesting.
And I think one of my personal dreams is to have that kind of network across the continent. I've started having conversations with journalists in other countries, Ghana, Cameroon, to see if it could be realized, because it's possible. It's a matter of finding those who are willing to do something beyond just the money, because there is
a much bigger
it's a bigger calling, like Njoki said. This is a public good.
Fantastic. We have 5 minutes. Fausta, briefly.
Thanks. I mean, there must be something saying that I want to say something about what I've just been talking about. But I wanted to say that for me, and this is quite radical, I think that one of the things that makes us vulnerable as journalists, or makes journalists vulnerable, is when they can be linked to their work. And collaboration, I mean, when I say linked, I mean directly linked to their work. And so we know that journalism is about who do I see when it's a TV journalism, or who do I hear, or whose byline am I reading? And I think that there is also a need for us to consider reinventing what journalism is about. Do we really need superstar journalists who stand out as individuals, and they stand out not just for the good, but they also stand out potentially to lose their lives? And this is something that is very real. We've experienced, of course, journalists who have either gone missing or who have been attacked, and this is because they are known. But then the public does not need to know journalists, I would say. What the public needs is the service that journalists provide. So this idea of collaborative journalism is an opportunity to reinvent journalism to the, I guess in a radical way, to move beyond the personalities and to move to public interest in a very specific way. I'll end there because I know that.
And Njoki, briefly, a minute or so.
Yeah, so for me, I think my parting shot is quite simple, that whatever we do, in the end, we must reinvent journalism. We must rethink what we call journalism today, the audiences that we serve, and the purpose that we serve in society. A lot of that needs to change. This commercialization of journalism, of news, and all that is hurting us more than it's hurting the journalists. It's hurting the society in general. There cannot be good democracy in a country without a strong media institution. And I think if we really care about our future and the future of the children, it would be important that we begin to think about a strong and free, viable and independent press. Thank you.
And I'll just wind up by obviously thanking you all. It's been great. I wish we had a lot more time than we had to talk about these issues. This is an ongoing conversation, obviously. One thing that I always say is I'll probably need to get a t-shirt on this, printed with this, because I always say that one of the guiding principles, I think, for journalism is essentially asking every time, what is it that we do, and what does the public think about what we do? And it means that you have centered, you've centered the public. And I just want to pay tribute to all the colleagues, obviously, who are working in very difficult environments. And I hope that, this pandemic will be an opportunity to the media to reintroduce itself to the public and to win its confidence and keep its confidence. Thank you all so much. And until next time.